I stood quietly beneath a thin drizzle on a chilly October afternoon, clutching a worn-out umbrella as movers carried polished mahogany furniture through the tall doors of a pristine white mansion 3 stories high, perched at the heart of Forest Hollow, the kind of gated neighborhood where wealth whispers instead of shouts. The house wasn't mine. It was a wedding gift to my younger sister, Layla, from our parents, an extravagant gesture that made it painfully clear who the favored child had always been. "Isn't it just perfect?" my mother beamed, completely unaware, perhaps willfully blind to how soaked I'd become standing in the driveway. "Layla and Evan are going to be so happy here. We already had the nursery planned out just in case." I nodded, holding back a sigh, still gripping the congratulations card I'd scraped together enough spare change to buy. Layla stepped out of the house like she'd walked off the pages of a lifestyle magazine, flawless in a designer coat, her diamond engagement ring catching the little light that filtered through the gray sky. "You made it," she said, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Well, what do you think of our first home?" First home. As if a $3 million estate was just some humble beginning. "It's beautiful," I managed, forcing a smile so tight it hurt. "Oh, don't be jealous, Madison," she teased, using the nickname I'd long since learned to hate. "I'm sure you'll find someone too. Maybe one of those sweet guys at your little bookstore?" My mother jumped in, ever helpful. "You know the Parker boy is still single. He's an accountant now. Very steady career." "I'm 52. I have a master's degree in literature. I teach part-time at a local college while working on my first novel." But to them, I've always been the family question mark, the one who chose words over wealth, dreams over security. I wasn't the one who deserved a mansion or a custom ring. I was the one who still hadn't figured life out. "I should head out," I said softly. "I've got a shift this evening." "On a Saturday?" My mother frowned. "The store's short-staffed." Layla rolled her eyes. "Always the martyr. You'll never get ahead if you keep choosing struggle over support." Support. That was the word they liked to use instead of control. The full ride to business school I turned down? Support. The job at Dad's firm I never applied for? Support. The endless stream of arranged coffee dates with successful men I politely declined? All part of their vision of helping me be someone I never wanted to be. "Take some leftovers at least," Mom insisted, placing a foil-wrapped box in my hands. "It breaks my heart thinking of you eating alone in that tiny apartment." I didn't tell her that apartment, though. Barely 600 square feet above a used bookstore in Millbridge was my sanctuary. It was where I surrounded myself with stories, art, silence, and possibility. It was where I was building something of my own, without expectations, without shame. And as I turned to leave that day shivering, humiliated, I didn't know it yet, but everything in my life was about to change. The next morning began like so many others had before it, quiet, gray, and ordinary. I stopped by Hank's Corner Market for my usual black coffee, half out of habit, half out of comfort. Hank had owned that store for over 4 decades, and somehow he'd become something of a surrogate father to half the town, including me. His thick-rimmed glasses and gruff voice never changed. But that morning, there was something different in his eyes, a glimmer I hadn't seen before. "Did you check your ticket, Maddie?" he asked, nearly bouncing behind the counter. It took me a moment to realize what he meant. I'd forgotten about the lottery ticket I'd bought 2 nights earlier, a moment of whimsy after a long shift, a purchase made with the last $5 I had in my wallet. I had no expectations. It was more ritual than hope. Still, I pulled it out from behind a used receipt and handed it over. "What were the numbers?" I asked, already preparing to toss it in the trash. Hank didn't answer right away. He just nodded toward the small TV mounted in the corner, tuned to the local news. The winning numbers were scrolling across the bottom of the screen in calm, unassuming font. 8, 17, 24, 36, 41, 55. I stared at them, then I stared at the ticket. And then, as my breath caught in my throat, I looked again, this time reading every digit 3 times over just to be sure. They matched. All 6 of them. Every single number matched. My knees buckled, and I grabbed the edge of the counter, stunned into silence. "Hank, I think I won," I whispered, but my voice didn't feel like mine anymore. He grinned, a warm, proud smile that made my eyes well with tears. "I know you did, sweetheart. I watched the draw live last night and nearly dropped my sandwich." You're the only one I sold that sequence to. Everything tilted. The room, my thoughts, the weight of the past 20 years, $96 million. It didn't feel real. I sat down before I collapsed, my hands trembling as I clutched the paper that had just rewritten my life. First things first, Hank said, steady as ever. You sign that ticket, right now, and don't you breathe a word to anyone until you've got legal protection. He poured me a glass of water, locked the ticket in his old safe, and picked up the phone. My daughter Caroline's a financial attorney. She'll meet you in an hour. I just nodded, barely able to form a coherent thought. As I sat there, staring at the floor and trying to remember how to breathe, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Layla. Brunch at the house tomorrow, wedding planning stuff, wear something decent for once, and please don't be late like last time. I read it twice. The tone hadn't changed. The assumptions, the condescension, the expectation that I would always drop everything to show up and play the role they'd written for me, a spectator to her spotlight. A stand-in family member they remembered when it was convenient. But this time, for the first time, I had something more important to do, and for once, when I replied, I wasn't lying. Can't make it. I have plans. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Caroline in her corner office overlooking Harbor Square. She'd handled everything discreetly, brilliantly. We'd set up trusts, hidden my identity behind layers of legal protection, and secured every penny of the winnings so not even a bloodhound could trace it back to me without my permission. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. Once we submit this, your name will be made public. Are you ready for that? I thought about it. The quiet resignation letter I'd left on my manager's desk, the generous check I'd tucked inside, enough to hire 2 new employees. The modest but charming craftsman home I'd purchased under a trust name in a quiet corner of Willow Creek, and the seed money I'd already funneled into something I'd only ever dreamed of, my own publishing house. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. The next morning, my name was everywhere: front pages, talk shows, scrolling banners across national news networks. The bookstore clerk who won $96 million. The reclusive writer who vanished overnight and re-emerged a millionaire. I didn't answer any calls that day, not from strangers, not from old classmates, and certainly not from family. But they came anyway, as I knew they would. First, Layla. Oh my God, Maddie. Why didn't you tell us? Call me seriously. Then my mother. Madison Elaine Cartwright, how could you keep this from us? We're coming over right now. Where are you living? And then my father, ever the final word. Your mother is in hysterics. Call us immediately. I silenced my phone, set it on the kitchen counter of my new home, and made myself a cup of tea. Through the large bay window, I could see the garden I planned to turn into a reading nook, the light falling softly across the floor like a promise. I was calm, unshakably calm. When the doorbell rang, I wasn't surprised. Thanks to Caroline, I had a discreet but excellent security system, complete with a camera and 2-way audio. There they were, Layla in designer heels that didn't suit the gravel path, my mother in pearls, already smoothing her dress, and my father pacing with the look of a man who'd just been denied at the country club. I opened the door slowly, careful, and poised. Madison, my mother exclaimed, attempting to step in. We've been calling you nonstop. Why haven't you answered? And how on earth did you afford this place? The money hasn't even been released yet. Hello, Mother, I said quietly. Would you like to come in? They filed in, eyes scanning the space like critics at a gallery. The living room was lined with tall bookshelves and warm wood tones. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility. Layla ran her fingers along the spines of my carefully curated collection and smirked. Well, I guess you can finally move into a real neighborhood now. There's a place near Usenly 4 million. I'm happy here, I replied simply. My mother leaned forward, her voice syrupy and deliberate. Sweetheart, this is life-changing. You'll need advisors, proper guidance. Your father knows people who can help you manage it wisely. I already have a team, I cut in. Very competent, very private. And please, call me Madison. Layla's eyes narrowed. Don't be difficult. We're just trying to help. God knows you've never been good with money. I didn't flinch. You mean like the $10,000 you loaned me for that small business idea in 2008, the one you never repaid? Her cheeks colored. That was different. It always is. I stood, letting the weight of my voice settle. For years, I've been the cautionary tale at your dinner parties, the example of what not to be. You bought Layla a house, paid for her education, her wedding, her startup. What did I get for graduating with honors? A lecture on choosing practical careers. We were worried about you, my mother said quietly. You've always chosen such risky paths. No, I chose to live a life that was mine. One you never approved of because it didn't fit your mold. They stared at me, and for the first time, they didn't have a script to fall back on. I went to my desk and pulled out 3 envelopes. Layla, I said, handing her the first. This is a cashier's check. 10-0. Repayment for that loan, with interest. She blinked, but took it. Mother, father, I continued, offering the second envelope. This covers every cent you've ever given megifts, allowances, hand-me-downs. I kept records. You can consider our account settled. They didn't move. The last envelope contains documents outlining my new publishing company, my literacy foundation, and investment plans. I have built a future on my terms. I don't need your help. I never did. But we're family, my mother whispered, eyes glassy. Yes, I said, walking them to the door. And family is supposed to love without conditions, support without judgment, and celebrate without comparison. But you didn't do that. You only came because now you need something from me. My father opened his mouth, but no words came. Layla's expression twisted into something I hadn't seen before, not anger, but loss. Real loss. You think you're better than us now? No, I replied. I always was. You just never noticed. And with that, I closed the door behind them on their expectations, on their disapproval, and for the first time in my life, on the version of me they thought they owned. In the days that followed my family's visit, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt clear. For the first time in years, the air around me seemed lighter, no longer weighed down by the need for approval or the dull ache of being constantly misunderstood. But I also knew peace was fragile, especially when money entered the equation, and I wasn't naive enough to think that closing my front door would close the chapter entirely. Word of my winnings had spread like wildfire, not just in our quiet town of Willow Creek, but across the state and beyond. News vans parked near the gates of my neighborhood, and envelopes piled up each morning, some filled with congratulations, others with outlandish requests. The media labeled me the bookstore millionaire, a headline that made me smile the first time I read it, not because it was flashy, but because for once, the world saw value in who I already was, not who I was supposed to become. While the noise swelled outside, I kept my focus inward. Carolina, my attorney, and Hank's daughter had helped me navigate the legal maelstrom with the precision of a surgeon. Every cent was placed in carefully constructed trusts, shielded under shell corporations, and woven into a network of silent but powerful financial structures that ensured privacy, stability, and, above all, control. Control I'd never had before, not over my finances, and certainly not over my own narrative. I used that control wisely. I purchased a modest home in a quiet arts district, nothing flashy, but warm, historic, and full of natural light. I had the walls repainted in calming shades of cream and green, the bookshelves built from scratch by a retired carpenter who read poetry during his breaks. In the evenings, I would sit in the garden and plan. Not parties, not vacations, but legacy. I'd spent so much of my life silenced or sidelined that the idea of creating space for other voices like mine became more than a dream. It became a mission. I founded Cartwright, Elm, a small independent publishing house focused on writers over 40 whose stories had been ignored, rejected, or lost in the noise of younger, trendier voices. I hired editors who valued substance over sales projections, and designers who understood that a good story didn't need gimmicks to be meaningful. We didn't aim to be the biggest, we aimed to be honest, purposeful, human. At the same time, I launched the Willow Foundation, a nonprofit committed to funding literacy programs in under-resourced communities, because I remembered too well what it felt like to love books but live without access to them. All of this was done quietly, intentionally, without the fanfare my family would have insisted upon. I didn't want their kind of spotlight. I wanted roots. I wanted to build something that would outlast a headline or a bank balance. Then came the inevitable. The calls turned into texts. The texts turned into letters. And finally, the letters turned into visits. Layla showed up first, unannounced, one early morning just as the frost was beginning to coat the edges of my rose garden. Her hair wasn't quite as sleek as it used to be, and the gold on her earrings had begun to chip subtle changes, but telling. "I saw Cartwright Elm in the Business Journal," she began, not even waiting to be invited in. "Must be nice having everything handed to you." I looked at her, not with anger, but with the same gaze I used to reserve for unfinished manuscripts' potential, buried beneath bitterness. "You mean the money?" I asked gently. She scoffed. "Yes, Madison, the money. You were broke a month ago and now you're handing out publishing deals like candy." I didn't rise to her bait. Instead, I led her to the kitchen, poured her tea, and placed a single envelope on the table between us. "What's this?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "An invitation. We're hosting a local author showcase next month. You're welcome to come if you'd like to see what I'm building." She didn't touch the envelope. She didn't stay long, either. But she left quieter than she arrived, which was something. My parents came next together this time, which in itself was unusual. My father's firm had taken a hit in the market downturn, and Mother's Country Club had increased its membership fees, forcing them to confront a financial reality they weren't used to. They didn't ask how I was. They asked how much I planned to donate to keep the family investments afloat. "We're not asking for handouts," my father clarified. "Just a loan, a bridge, between family." I didn't argue. I simply asked a question. "What are you willing to build with it?" He didn't have an answer. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. So I made them an offer not of money, but of opportunity. I'd spoken with the director of a local community college who needed experienced business instructors. My father could apply. I'd met the development chair of the Willow Arts Council who was looking for a fundraising coordinator. Layla, with her charm and social fluency, would be perfect. They didn't respond right away. Pride is a stubborn guest, especially when it's been coddled for decades. But I saw something shift in them, not gratitude, not yet, but the beginning of realization. That this moment wasn't just about winning money. It was about reclaiming identity. And for me, that identity was never rooted in being the forgotten daughter or the black sheep. It was in being the one who dared to step off the path, fall hard, get back up, and build a new road entirely. As the sun dipped below the trees that evening, I sat in my office, surrounded by pages, some mine, some not filled with stories waiting to be told. The world outside still buzzed with headlines and half-truths, but inside my walls, there was focus, purpose, and calm. Because the twist in my story wasn't the money. It was that I finally had the freedom to become the person I'd always been meant to be. And that changed everything. 6 months passed not in a blur, but in quiet, deliberate strides. While the world seemed determined to frame me as some overnight success, as if the money alone had transformed me into someone new, I knew better. I hadn't changed. I had simply come home to myself. The difference was that, for the first time in my life, the world was paying attention. We launched Cartwright Elm inside an old converted warehouse on the edge of Maplewood's historic district, a building once abandoned, now restored with exposed brick walls, warm lighting, and endless shelves lined with stories waiting to be born. It wasn't flashy, it was purposeful. Every corner was designed with intention, from the reading nook beneath the skylight to the community board covered in handwritten notes from aspiring writers who'd found the courage to submit their first pages. The night of our opening gala, I stood near the entryway with Hank beside me, watching the room fill with people who had once felt invisible: teachers, caregivers, veterans, retirees, no authors, editors, and mentors. We didn't serve champagne. We served coffee and slices of warm pecan pie from Ruth's Diner down the road, because we weren't there to impress anyone. We were there to connect. And that, I believed, was a revolution in its own quiet way. Children from our literacy program giggled as they shared their illustrated short stories in the kids' showcase area. Former factory workers mingled with literary agents. The air buzzed not with pretense, but with possibility. Every face glowed not from money or status, but from something rarer: dignity reclaimed. I was speaking with a woman named Teresa, who had just signed her first memoir at age 63, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Layla. "Saw your company in the journal. James lost his job. Mom and Dad's finances are tight. We could really use family support right now." There was no greeting, no congratulations, just expectation. as if nothing had changed except everything had. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, their messages came in waves: first, carefully worded attempts at reconnection, then guilt-laced appeals, and finally, veiled accusations. According to Layla, their starter mansion was suddenly too small for 3 growing boys, and the economy just wasn't what it used to be. My parents hinted at the collapse of my father's firm and the lapse of their country club membership, always wrapping their needs in a silk ribbon of entitlement. But the truth was, they didn't want reconciliation. They wanted restoration of their comfort, their image, their control. And I had no intention of giving them that. One rainy afternoon, I received a message from Sophie, one of our youngest program students, a shy girl who had barely spoken a word when she joined our reading circles months ago. Now, she was clutching a spiral-bound notebook and tugging at my sleeve. "Miss Cartwright," she whispered, eyes wide with pride, "would you read my story?" I smiled and knelt beside her, brushing a curl behind her ear. "Of course I will, sweetheart. What's it about?" She bit her lip before answering. "It's about a girl who finds a magic pen, but it only works if she writes something true." That stopped me. I looked at her, not just the words, but the intention behind them, and for a moment, I saw myself, not just as I was now, but as I had been. A girl whose words were too often dismissed, dreams too easily folded and filed away by those who thought they knew better. As I flipped through her pages, I felt something stirring it, nostalgia, but clarity. Just then, Caroline appeared beside me, murmuring that we had a visitor outside asking to speak to me. When I turned to the front doors, I saw Themi parents and Layla, standing in the rain under a borrowed umbrella, looking nothing like the figures they once had been. My father's tailored suit clung damply to his frame, his posture slackened. My mother's perfectly coiffed hair was frizzed by the drizzle, her face pale, lips pursed in nervous calculation. Layla, though still in designer heels, now wore an expression I hadn't seen on her face since we were children: uncertainty. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. I didn't invite them in. "We just want to talk," my mother said, her voice cracking at the edges. "Please." I glanced toward the glass where inside people were laughing, telling stories, celebrating something real. Then I looked back at the 3 people who had once believed I'd never amount to anything unless I did it their way. "You had years to talk," I replied, not with anger but with certainty. "You just weren't listening." "We're struggling," Layla confessed, mascara smudged beneath her eyes. "James lost everything in a bad investment. The house is in foreclosure. Dad's firm is basically bankrupt. We have nowhere else to turn." "And now you're here," I said slowly. "Not because you believe in what I'm doing, but because you think I owe you." My father straightened his back, but there was no real defiance in him anymore. "You have the means, Madison. We're still your family." "No," I said, my voice steady. "You're still yourselves. That's the problem." They didn't know how to respond, and I didn't need them to. "I'm not giving you money," I continued, "but I'm offering something better if you're willing to earn it." I handed my father a card contact information for a nonprofit financial firm that was looking to hire retired professionals to mentor young entrepreneurs. I gave Layla a flyer from the Arts Council. They needed an events coordinator with fundraising skills. And I told my mother that a nearby community center was hiring reading volunteers if she wanted to rediscover the parts of herself that didn't come with a country club badge. They stared at the papers as if I'd handed them a foreign language. "You expect us to work?" Layla asked, her voice caught between disbelief and insult. "I expect you to grow," I said, "just like I did." And then, before they could argue, justify, or retreat into familiar patterns, I turned and walked back inside, not slamming the door behind me, but letting it close with quiet grace. Because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about boundaries. And this was how I chose to come back, not in defiance, but in truth. The weeks that followed our quiet standoff outside my publishing house were filled with silence, tense, heavy, but strangely peaceful. I didn't hear from my family again. Not through phone calls, not through texts, not even through the long, guilt-laden voicemails my mother used to leave when she wanted something but refused to say it outright. For the first time in years, my days were filled with meaningful work and free of the dull hum of familial disappointment. But peace, I had learned, was always temporary when ego was involved. So when I arrived early to set up for our spring showcase celebration of the new voices we had helped publish, I wasn't surprised to see Layla's car idling outside the venue, nor to find my father pacing near the entrance, nervously adjusting his tie as if preparing for a job interview. My mother sat rigid in the passenger seat, lips pursed and hands clenched around her purse, like it held the last scrap of control she still possessed. They weren't here to congratulate me. They were here to make one last attempt to reclaim something they had never truly valued me. I stood in the center of the main room, surrounded by soft music, rows of tables lined with freshly printed books, and volunteers arranging bouquets beside name cards. The scent of lilies and ink hung in the air like a benediction, while sunlight poured through the tall windows in golden streams that seemed to bless every inch of what we had built. I spotted them hovering at the threshold, uncertain whether they were welcome. They were not used to hesitation, and that in itself revealed more than they realized. When I finally stepped forward to greet them, it was not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. "Is this really the right time?" I asked, my voice measured but not cold. "This event isn't about me. It's about the writers and the communities we've helped lift up." "We wouldn't have come if it weren't urgent," my father said, his tone not quite stern, not quite pleading, hovering somewhere in between pride and desperation. Layla stepped forward, her heels echoing on the wooden floors. She looked tired beneath the foundation, and her once carefully curated image now frayed at the edges. "James is gone," she said flatly. "He left after everything collapsed. The house is gone too. I'm staying with Mom and Dad for now." I didn't flinch. I simply waited. "We need your help," she continued, quieter now. "We're out of options." Behind them, I noticed some of our guests watching discreetly, pretending to browse books or sip coffee while clearly aware that something was unfolding. My mother shifted uncomfortably, as if the casual, creative atmosphere of the room offended her sensibilities. No polished banisters, no chandelier, just honest wood and the unmistakable hum of purpose. "You're not here to support me," I said. "You're here because you think I'm obligated to fix what you refuse to face." "That's not fair," my father replied, his voice rising slightly. "We made mistakes, yes, but we're your family." "Were you?" I asked, not with cruelty, but with the weight of years behind the question. When I graduated with honors and all I received was a lecture on realism? When I was writing my first manuscript in a freezing apartment while you hosted lavish parties for Layla's business school friends? When I was eating instant soup 3 nights a week and you offered me dating advice instead of asking if I was okay? Silence. "You didn't just overlook me," I continued. "You diminished me. You tried to mold me into someone I wasn't, and when I refused, you wrote me off as difficult, as disappointing, as less." "We didn't know," my mother whispered. "We didn't understand." "You didn't try," I corrected gently. "And now you're standing here asking for rescue, when for years you wouldn't even offer kindness." My father's face collapsed into a frown, his posture shrinking, his presence suddenly small in a way I had never seen. My mother reached out, brushing her hand against my sleeve, as if hoping touch could succeed where words had failed. "You've built something beautiful, Madison," she said, her voice cracking. "We just didn't see it, not in time." I studied her, not out of spite, but because, for the first time, she looked like a person rather than a force. And then I said the words I never imagined I'd say, not because they were rehearsed, but because they were true. "I forgave you a long time ago. That's why I'm not angry anymore. But forgiveness doesn't mean I give you power over me again. It doesn't mean I bankroll your denial or fund your comfort." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't look away. I needed her to see all of it, what I had built, what I had endured, and what I had chosen to become despite them. "I'm not asking for money," my father finally said, voice hollow. "I'm asking for a chance." I paused. Then, slowly, I reached into my bag and pulled out 3 neatly folded packets. "I spoke with the director of Carter Financial. They're looking for senior advisors to lead mentorship programs for small businesses. They've agreed to interview you. It's not guaranteed, but it's real." I handed it to my father, who accepted it like it weighed more than any check I could have written. I turned to Layla. "The Willow Arts Council is launching a fundraiser for at-risk youth arts programs. They need someone with event planning experience, someone who can connect with donors. It's yours if you want to apply." She opened the folder, eyes scanning the page, lips trembling. "I don't know if I can do this," she murmured. I don't know if I'm anything outside of all this. You are, I said gently. You just haven't met her yet. Lastly, I handed my mother a flyer. The community center needs reading tutors for older adults re-entering the workforce. It's not glamorous, but it matters. She took it with shaking hands, and for once, she didn't ask for anything more. As they stood there, holding the papers like lifelines, I realized that this was the confrontation I had needed, not a screaming match, not a dramatic exit, but a reckoning shaped by clarity and self-worth. I didn't need them to kneel or beg or apologize in rehearsed phrases. I needed them to see me, and for the first time, I believed they did. They left quietly, and as the door closed behind them, I felt no triumphantly, a deep, unwavering peace. Not because they had changed, but because I no longer needed them to. Weeks passed after that quiet confrontation, and though my family and I exchanged no further words, the air between us no longer felt suffocating. There was no victory march, no dramatic reconciliation, only a fragile, respectful silence that said more than apologies ever could. They knew now where I stood, and more importantly, I knew it too. My days became full in the best kind of way: early mornings, spent editing new manuscripts over black coffee, afternoons reading with children at the community center, and evenings curled in my garden nook with a fountain pen and the sound of wind through the ivy. I was still working on my novel, a slow, stubborn beast that refused to be rushed, but I no longer saw it as something I had to prove. I saw it as a gift I could finally write from a place of peace, not pain. Then, one Saturday, during our quarterly story showcase, as sunlight streamed through the warehouse windows and laughter echoed from a circle of children showing off their handmade zines, I noticed Hermie Mother standing alone in the far corner of the room, not dressed to impress, but in a soft cardigan and walking shoes, holding a folder in her hands like it might disappear if she gripped it too tightly. I didn't move toward her. I let her find me. I didn't expect you, I said when she reached my side. I didn't plan to come, she admitted, glancing at the children with a mix of awe and uncertainty. But something told me I needed to see this with my own eyes. I said nothing, waiting. She looked at the volunteers, the readers, the mothers, the elderly man helping a teenager with his spelling, and she finally spoke again, this time more to herself than to me. I thought legacy was something you passed down through wealth or tradition, but this... She paused, voice trembling. This is something else entirely. I was so busy trying to shape you into who I thought you needed to be, I never stopped to notice who you already were. I felt my chest tighten not from anger or hurt, but from the unfamiliar pull of compassion that wasn't weighed down by expectation. She opened the folder in her hand to reveal a stack of handouts and lesson plans. I signed up to volunteer at the reading program, she said. 3 mornings a week. I nodded, not out of surprise, but out of understanding. She was trying not in the old way, where help was a form of control, but in a new way, where giving came without strings. That mattered more than any apology ever could. As she wandered off to speak with one of the coordinators, I turned back toward the front of the room just in time to see Sophie, the little girl who once handed me her story about the magic penno, holding a polished, printed booklet with her name on the cover. She caught my eye, beamed, and ran to me with the excitement only a child who's just done something big can express. "Miss Cartwright, look, they printed my story like a real book." I knelt beside her, took the booklet in my hands, and felt something that brought tears to my eyes, not pride in myself, but joy in what we had created together. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about building something lasting, something honest, something that gave people, especially the overlooked and underestimated, a chance to be seen. Later that evening, after the chairs were stacked and the lights dimmed, I sat beneath the string lights in our courtyard with my notebook open and my pen moving at last, not with urgency, but with clarity. I wasn't writing for validation anymore. I was writing because I had something worth saying. My phone buzzed beside me, and I glanced down to see a message from Layla. "I got the job at the Arts Council. Starts Monday. Any advice?" I smiled. "Yes. Be yourself. Your real self. I don't know what the future holds for them, whether my parents will find new meaning in their later years, or if Layla will finally discover who she is without comparison. But I do know that I'm no longer part of their shadows or their regrets. I'm walking my own road now, and every step forward is a choice, not a reaction. The lottery didn't change me. It gave me the resources to stop apologizing for who I already was. And in that quiet, extraordinary shift, I found the one kind of wealth that can't be taxed, spent, or stolen: the freedom to be fully and unapologetically myself. And that, I've learned, is where the real story begins. CTA, call to action. If this story touched something deep in you, if you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told you weren't enough, know this: your value was never measured by their approval. You have the right to reclaim your voice, your worth, and your future. And when you do it not for revenge, but for redemption. Share this video with someone who needs that reminder today, and if you have a story of your own, drop it in the comments. You never know who you might inspire. Subscribe for more true stories of quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of justice that comes from within.